garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So the soldiers did these things. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. I want you to think for a moment about Mary. Mary was the one whom the angel had appeared to and told her she would have a child, and that child would be the Son of God. Mary was the one who'd raised that child. She was the one who had taken him to Jerusalem and left him there and run back to find him teaching the teachers of the law and the Pharisees. Mary was the one who was at the wedding of Cana when Jesus performed his first miracle. Mary was there when people said, your mother and brothers are here to see you, and he said, "I have no family." She was there through all his life, through his miracles. She would have heard the stories of the wonderful things he was doing. And then it comes to this day that she would never have conceived possible. This one who did miraculous things was now hanging on a cross and breathing his last in front of her. Can you think for a moment how that might feel? I struggle to comprehend how Mary would have felt. I have a small possible window that I can glimpse through. A personal testimony from a personal story, from our family. I was sharing with somebody before the service just a little of it, that when it came to my induction, you saw 3 boys here, myself and my 2 brothers. What you may not know, some of you do, some of you don't, is I've actually got a sister. I've got a sister called Debbie. And long story short, for one reason and another, she has become estranged to our family. And she has chosen to ignore all contact, chosen to move away and to not speak to any of us. And so I get a glimpse of this when I look in my mum's eyes at Christmas, when we sit around the table and she's not there. I get a small glimpse when we went to my dad's 60th birthday party the other day and my sister isn't part of it. Just a small glimpse when at my wedding, possibly the happiest day of my life, and I look around and she's not there. And at my induction here, when I look at my dad with tears in his eyes because she's not here to share in it. It's a real pain. It hurts. And I maybe just possibly, perhaps, get a small inkling from that into what Mary felt as she saw her son dying, and the pain that seared, that cut deep, as she looked on and went, "I don't understand this." The pain of a mother. And the amazing thing is that Jesus is hanging on a tree. He is actually experiencing the very definition of excruciating pain. He is nailed to a block of wood, suffocating, and in that moment of absolute pain and suffering, he is so touched by her brokenness, by her hurting, that he looks down and he says, "Mother, behold your son." I was stunned when I was reading that this week again. That Jesus, in the midst of all that agony, in the pain physically that he was feeling and spiritually as the punishment for sin was poured out on him, he looked down and he loves us so much that he would look upon us and say, "I went through all of that, but I want you to know I love you. I see your pain. And I speak into it." So we have the story of Mary, whose son was dying on the cross. She looked, and it speaks of the reality of relationships broken, doesn't it? It said in the video that we watched that their hearts were breaking. And so there's relationship broken. And then we come to this other character who I find fascinating. In Mark's Gospel, you don't have to turn to it, but in Mark chapter 15, verses 33 to 41, somebody else looks on. Somebody else looks on and says something amazing. Mark 15, 33 to 41, we read the account of the centurion. And when the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, behold, he is calling Elijah. And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, put it on a reed, and gave it to him to drink, saying, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down. And Jesus uttered a loud cry and breathed his last. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom. And when the centurion, who was stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, truly, this man was the Son of God. This man was a centurion. This wasn't his first rodeo when it would come to crucifixion. This wouldn't have been the first time he would have seen a man die. To reach the status of centurion, he would have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of people die. He would have seen crucifixions before. And yet something in this moment stands out. He looks and he sees something and he witnesses something that makes him say, surely this man was the Son of God. This man who would have been hardened to it, who would have been numbed to what he was witnessing to some extent. Something breaks through and he sees who Jesus truly is in that moment. Why did I look at these two characters? Why did I want to bring your attention to these two characters? Well, when we come to the cross-examination, the first thing I want you to see from these two characters is we are created for relationship. We're designed for it. We're made for it. God made us in his image. We are created after the image of the triune God, the Trinity, God who has existed for all eternity past as three persons in one, eternally loving one another. And God calls us into that and says, you get to share in what it means to be in relationship. We're created for a relationship. And that's why, for me, death and the pain that we feel and the hurt that cuts so deep, it points me towards this fact and says, there has to be a God. And there has to be more than this. Because if I was just some cosmic accident, then losing those close to me wouldn't hurt. Losing those that I love wouldn't wrench so hard because it's just a fact of life. It's just part of what makes me human. But because death hurts us so deeply, it tells us that we're created for more than just this. We were created to know loving relationship in a deathless environment, in a way where death won't rip people from our lives. That's why Jesus could look on at Mary and just sympathize with her pain, because he knew this wasn't what she should have to feel. So the second thing is that don't let pain turn you from the cross. Don't turn away from Jesus and think that hurts within this life drive you away from him. Let them drive you to him. Let them put you at the foot of the cross so that he can look on you and say, I love you. Don't turn from the cross. You see, I was thinking on this, and poor old Beck, she isn't here tonight, but if she was, she would have heard this sermon twice, because I preached it to her over the dinner table this evening. Because I was looking in John's Gospel. I said you needed to keep your finger in John's Gospel. And if you turn to John chapter 11, We've got the shortest verse in the Bible here. Jesus wept. And it's about broken relationships. It's about hurt. And I was reading this and something jumped out to me about this. This is literally days. Bear this in mind. These events happen days before Jesus is going to go to the cross. Just days before. And if we look in John chapter 11, and I'll just highlight a couple of verses to you. So Lazarus, Jesus' friend, is sick, and word comes to him. And Jesus, it says in verse 5, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. He loved them. That's what John records. And then it says, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he got up straight away and went to them. If you've got that in your version, you've got the wrong version, just to be clear. It says, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Think about that. Jesus loves them, so he stays 2 days longer. He arrives, after these 2 days, he goes and he arrives there, and the news is Lazarus is dead. Lazarus has died. And Mary and Martha both come to him with breaking hearts, and they say, if you'd been here, if you'd just been here, Lord, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. That's what they say. They say to Jesus, if you'd been here, our brother would still be alive. And we read Jesus is deeply troubled by this. In the verses there, it says that Jesus is troubled in the midst of all this. The one who calmed the storm, the one who raised the little girl from the dead, the one who has healed the blind is troubled in this moment. Why is he troubled? Because he sees their pain, firstly. He sees the hurt that broken relationships causes. He sees the pain that they're feeling. But more than that, their words, when they say, if you'd been here, their words are saying, not in so many words, but they say, you don't love us. If you'd been here, if you truly loved us, you'd have made the journey. That's what they're saying. They're saying, if you truly loved us, you'd have been here. Because that's how they feel. And Jesus doesn't rebuke them. Jesus doesn't tell them no. What's the consequence? Jesus weeps. Jesus weeps. Because he knows what's going to happen in a few days' time. He knows what's going to happen just momentarily. Because actually, have you seen, I love his prayer in this passage. Because he looks up and he says, Father, I know you hear me because you always hear me. He said, Father, you hear me, you always hear me. We're always talking to each other. So I know you hear me, but I'm saying this for their benefit. And he knows exactly what's going to happen. He knows Lazarus is going to walk out the grave. He knows Lazarus is going to walk and talk because he says he's the they say he's the resurrection and the life. But Jesus weeps because he knows that people look on and they perhaps the onlookers will look and go, well, he raised him. That was easy. That was a magic trick. That was something, it was simple for Jesus to do that. It's really easy. Jesus knows that in a couple of days' time, in less than a week, the full cost of what being the resurrection and the life is going to come to bear. He knows that he's going to have to endure the cross to make it possible to defeat death, to be able to bring life where death has held sway. Jesus knows he's going to have to go through the cross. He's going to have to go to the cross. And so he weeps. He weeps because they say, you didn't love us. You didn't love us enough. You didn't come. And he says, hey, I love you so much, I'm going to go through the cross. I'm going to endure that for you. Jesus loved them. Don't let your pain turn you away from the cross. Don't let your hurt, your breaking heart drive you away from Jesus. Let it drive you to him. Because when you go to him, you can cry, Abba, Father. You can cry, Abba, Father to him. To God because of him, Romans 8, verses 15 to 17 tells us that we don't have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who is, Hebrews says that. We have one who is tested in every way and is able to sympathize with our weaknesses. But Romans 8, 15 to 17. I'm jumping around today, just to test you. Romans 8, 15 to 17 says these words. Let's start with, 15. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with him in order that we may be glorified, also glorified with him. You see, when we come to the cross, when we see the broken relationships for Mary and the realization of the centurion that this was the Son of God, Bex asked me a really interesting question at the table, and I pondered it, and I think I'm there. She said, Phil, why is it on the cross Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? She said, because he knew what was happening. He knew the plan. He knew where this was going. And yet in that moment, and we were talking, and I said, if you think back to the Lazarus incident, he says, Father, Father. And yet in this moment, he doesn't say Father, he says, my God. Because the relationship is broken. The eternal Trinity is, in that moment, fractured. Why? So that you and I don't need to know that. So that you and I don't have to be separated from God, because we can call out Abba, Father, because Jesus was separated from him for us. So what do I want you to go away with tonight from Good Friday? I want you to see in the cross that God knows our hurts and our pains because he has tasted them. He has been there. And so we have a Savior who can sympathize and stand with us in the moment and is more than qualified to speak to us in our hurt and our pain because he knows it. More than that, I want you to see that we were created for a relationship with God. And so when we're hurting, when we're in pain, when we're suffering, let it drive you to Jesus. Why? Because there you will find grace and peace in your time of trouble. That's what Hebrews promises. We'll find mercy and grace in time of trouble. As we come to a close on this Good Friday, we're going to sing a final hymn. And it's the final song, You Chose the Cross with Every Breath. That's the staggering thing, is that Jesus knew that our broken relationships would need him to choose the cross. It would need him to have his relationship with God broken so that I could have mine restored. That's amazing. That's stunning. Let's stand and sing this final song together.